Good day and welcome to another Mr. Kilroy presentation. Today I shall attempt to read a small essay from a man by the name of Jack Donovan. We all like to think that we live in such a non-violent society here in Canada. And we kind of look down our noses at our neighbors to the south, the U.S., as being a violent society. We even have people who like to delude themselves that they themselves are non-violent. And, for the most part, that is quite true. They abhor violence. They will not lift a hand to save another or to defend themselves. They will not use violence. You'll hear them saying, violence never solved anything. Truth is, I don't think they've ever really considered nor thought how it is possible for them to stand there or to sit there and say, I'm nonviolent. Well, Mr. Donovan here has come up with quite an eye-opener. Because when you really think about it, it makes absolute perfect sense. His essay, Violence is Golden, by Jack Donovan. A lot of people like to think they are non-violent. Generally, people claim to abhor the use of violence. And violence is viewed negatively by most folks. Many fail to differentiate between just and unjust violence. Some, especially vain, self-righteous types, like to think they have risen above the nasty, violent cultures of their ancestors. They say that violence isn't the answer. They say that violence doesn't solve anything. They're wrong. Every one of them relies on violence every single day. On election day, people from all walks of life line up to cast their ballots, and by doing so, they hope to influence who gets to wield the axe of authority. Those who want to end violence, as if that were possible or even desirable, often seek to disarm their fellow citizens. This does not actually end violence. It merely gives the state mob a monopoly on violence. This makes you safer, so long as you don't piss off the boss. All governments, left, right, or other, are by their very nature coercive. They have to be. Order demands violence. A rule not ultimately backed by the threat of violence is merely a suggestion. States rely on laws enforced by men ready to do violence against lawbreakers. Every tax code and every licensing requirement demands an escalating progression of penalties that in the end must result in the forcible seizure of property or imprisonment by armed men prepared to do violence in the event of resistance or non-compliance. Every time a soccer mom stands up and demands harsher penalties for drunk driving or selling cigarettes to minors or owning a pit bull or not recycling, she is petitioning the state to use force to impose her will. She's no longer asking nicely. The viability of every family law, gun law, zoning law, traffic law, immigration law, import law, export law, and financial regulation depends on both the willingness and wherewithal of the group to exact order by force. When an environmentalist demands that we save the whales, he or she is in effect making an argument that saving the whales is so important that it is worth doing harm to humans whom harm whales. The peaceful environmentalist is petitioning the Leviathan, I would call that a metaphor for the government, to authorize the use of violence in the interest of protecting leviathans. Again, a metaphor for the whales. If state leaders were to agree and express that it was indeed important to save the whales, but then decline to penalize those who bring harm to whales, or decline to enforce those penalties under threat of violent police or military action, the expressed sentiment would be a meaningless gesture. Those who wanted to bring harm to whales would feel free to do so, as it is said, with impunity, without punishment. Without action, words are just words. Without violence, laws are just words. Violence isn't the only answer, but it is the final answer. One can make moral argument and ethical arguments and appeal to reason, emotion, aesthetics, and compassion. People are certainly moved by these arguments, and when sufficiently persuaded, providing, of course, that they are not excessively inconvenienced, people often choose to moderate or change their behaviors. Most reasonable people are. However, the willful submission of many inevitably creates a vulnerability waiting to be exploited by any one person who shrugs off social and ethical norms. If every man lays down his arms and refuses to pick them up, the first man to pick them up can do whatever he wants. Peace can only be maintained without violence so long as everyone sticks to the bargain. And to maintain peace, every single person in every successive generation, even after war is long forgotten, must continue to agree to remain peaceful forever and ever. No delinquent or upstart may ever ask the question, or else what? Because in a truly non-violent society, the best available answer is, or else we won't think you're a nice person, and we're not going to share with you. Our troublemaker is free to reply, I don't care. I'll take what I want. Violence is the final answer to the question, or else what? Violence is the gold standard, the reserve that guarantees order. In actuality, it is better than a gold standard, because violence has universal value. Violence transcends the quirks of philosophy, religion, technology, and culture. People say that music is a universal language. But a punch in the face hurts the same no matter what language you speak or what kind of music you prefer. If you are trapped in a room with me and I grab a pipe and I gesture to strike you with it, no matter who you are, your monkey brain will immediately understand, or else what? And thereby a certain order is achieved. The practical understanding of violence is as basic to human life and human order as is the idea that fire is hot. You can use it, but you must respect it. You can act against it, and you can sometimes control it, but you can't just wish it away. Like wildfire, sometimes it is overwhelming and you won't know it is coming until it is too late. Sometimes it is bigger than you, as the Cherokee, the Inca, the Romanovs, the Jews, the Confederates, the barbarians, and the Romans. They all know the answer to the question, or else what? This basic acknowledgement that order demands violence is not a revelation, but to some it may seem like one. The very notion may make some people apoplectic, and some will furiously attempt to dispute it with all sorts of convoluted and hypothetical arguments. But it doesn't sound very nice. But something doesn't need to be nice in order to be true. Reality doesn't bend over to accommodate fantasy or sentimentality. Our complex society relies on proxy violence. To the extent that many average people in the private sector can wander through life without really having to understand or think deeply about violence, because we are removed from it. We can afford to perceive it as a distant, abstract problem to be solved through high-minded strategy and social programming. When violence comes knocking, we simply make a call and the police come to stop the violence. Few civilians really take the time to think that what we are essentially doing is paying an armed band protection money to come and do orderly violence on our behalf. When those who would do violence to us are taken peacefully, most of us don't really make the connection. We don't even assert to ourselves that the reason a perpetrator allows himself to be arrested is because of the gun the gun on the officer's hip, or the implicit understanding that he will eventually be hunted down by more officers who have the authority to kill him if he is deemed a threat. That is, deemed a threat to order. There are something like 2.5 million people incarcerated in the United States. Over 90% of them are men. Most of them did not turn themselves in. Most of them don't try to escape at night because there is someone in a guard tower ready to shoot them. Many are non-violent offenders. Now, soccer moms, accountants, celebrity activists, free-range vegans all send in their tax dollars and by proxy spend billions and billions to feed an armed government that maintains order through violence. It is when our ordered violence gives way to disordered violence, as in the aftermath of a natural disaster, that we are forced to see how much we rely on those who maintain order through violence. People loot because they can, and kill because they think they'll get away with it. Dealing with violence and finding violent men who will protect you from other violent men suddenly becomes a real and pressing concern. A pal once told me a story about an incident recounted by a family friend who was a cop, and I think it gets the point across. A few teenagers were at a mall, hanging out outside a bookstore. They were goofing around and talking with some cops who were hanging around as well. The cop was relatively big. He was a big bloke, not someone who you would want to mess around with. One of the kids told the cop that he didn't see why society needed police. The big cop leaned over and said to the spindly kid, "Do you have any doubt in your mind about whether or not I could break your arms and take that book away from you if I felt like it?" The teenager, obviously shaken by the brutality of this statement, said, "No." That's why you need cops, kid. George Orwell wrote in his notes on nationalism that for the pacifist, the truth that those who abjure violence can only do so because others are committing violence on their behalf is obvious but impossible to accept. Much unreason flows from the inability to accept our passive reliance on violence for protection. Escapist fantasies of the John Lennon song Imagine corrupt our ability to see the world as it is and be honest with ourselves about the naturalness of violence to the human animal. There is no evidence to support the idea that man is an inherently peaceful creature. There is substantial evidence to support the notion that violence has always been part of human life. Before I continue, I'm just going to put a little editor's note in here. Have you ever wondered why many animals will flee the moment a human sets foot into their area? We have, in my area, a problem with coyotes. We have a problem with coyotes because they have lost their fear of men or of man. And that's something that should be filed away. Again, we are a violent creature. We are, at heart, an apex predator. The only difference between us and a tiger is that we have learned to make very effective tools. And that, my friends, has come at a huge cost over the millennia. To continue, there is substantial evidence to support the notion that violence has always been a part of human life. Everyday archaeologists unearth another primitive skull with damage from weapons or blunt force trauma. The very first legal codes were shockingly grisly. If we feel less threatened today, if we feel as though we live in a non-violent society, it is only because we have ceded so much power over our daily lives to the state. Some call this reason, but we might just as well call it laziness. A dangerous laziness, it would seem, given how little most people say they don't trust politicians. That is something truly to consider there, is that at some point in time we gave it all up to Big Daddy State. There was a time when we did have to walk around armed because there was always somebody wanting to take what you possessed away from you. Not that there were many streets, it wasn't safe to walk about alone. How do you think the story of Robin Hood got about? Or the romantic fantasies of highwaymen, so on and so forth? Because there was not a working police force patrolling and making sure that everybody was safe, and there was not the means to call them on an instant. Yes, we have become quite lazy because we are reliant upon others to do what we once had to do ourselves. To continue, violence does not come from movies or video games or music. Violence comes from people. It's about time people woke up from their 1960s haze and started being honest about violence again. People are violent, and that's okay, but you can't legislate it away or talk your way around it. Based on the available evidence, there is no reason to believe that world peace will ever be achieved or that violence can ever be stopped. It's time to quit worrying and learn to love the battle axe. History teaches us that if we don't, someone else will. In the past, I have had many discussions and debates with friends and family over this concept, not quite stating it as it has been stated above. But I do understand very implicitly, and the whole concept here is that the only reason we're peaceful people is because we agree not to take each other's stuff. I am a vehement and adamant supporter of concealed carry. I believe that an armed society is a polite society. It was not that far long ago in our history when if you were insulted or dishonored by somebody, you took up and fought a duel over your honor. It was the state that outlawed dueling. What I find extraordinarily peculiar is that the abject refusal to see the reality of society. Yes, most people are very peaceful, non-violent people. Why? They won't start something because they don't want it to be anything. They will just quietly go about life, go about their business daily. In the large metropolis of Toronto, the black hole, the center of the universe in Ontario, it has become known that it's only the threat of violence that keeps certain segments of its population at bay. The term swarming comes to mind, where a group of thugs swarms around an individual to take his stuff. And what I believe the ultimate breach of peaceful society, the home invasion. You're peacefully sitting in your home, a knock at the door comes, the next thing you know, you got a half a dozen or 3 or 4 thugs in your home wanting to take your stuff. When states enacted their concealed carry laws, and in particular the state of Florida, they said there would be blood flowing in the streets. Well, there's been a couple of really famous cases come out of Florida surrounding the stand your ground law, where people have defended themselves because they were under no duty to retreat. But the funny part of it was, what they found is that rapes dropped in half. Burglaries dropped in half. Assaults dropped dramatically. Why? Because there was the threat of reciprocal violence. And I've had so many discussions with family members that refuse, absolutely refuse, to acknowledge the truth of that statement, that an armed society is a polite society, that if a thug knows that he can be damaged in committing his crime, he'll pick another victim. He'll pick another target. I am both flummoxed and flabbergasted at how people will not stare at reality. It is as though you were tearing apart a favorite Christmas fable like Santa Claus, and forcing him to look at the reality is that yes, having a gun concealed on your person could very well save your life. And I've even heard them say, now get this, a police officer has a gun on his hip to protect himself because we're asking him to commit violence on our behalf. And we're asking him to do things. And I even asked my one relative, why do you think cops have guns? And he honestly said, so that he can enforce the law. Well, his statement is true, but not for the reasons that he was proposing. As I've just read this essay, and it bluntly points out that yes, we pay people to do violence for us. And I have made a video basically outlining the fact that when seconds count, help is minutes away. It's a very popular video that I've made. We even had a member of Parliament, at the time, the Attorney General of Canada, Ellen Rock, make this ridiculous statement that I came to Ottawa with the firm belief that only the police and military should have guns. And when I made a video comparing him to a Nazi, well, it was the exact, almost parroting what the Nazi regime had stated. Oh, did I receive heat on that. It seems the moment you bring up the Nazis in any conversation, or compare your compare somebody to a Nazi, everybody's willing to dismiss you right away. It's almost like there is a collective denial that your government could go wrong. But anyways, I think I have gone on enough. And I would like to wish everybody a wonderful day. This is Mr. Kilroy for the Freedom Pages. Have a wonderful day.